Hi everyone, greetings. My name is Lucas Petroni. I am a researcher here in Cebrap, São Paulo, postdoctoral researcher. This is our final panel today, so thank you everyone for staying here, for the guests and for the endurance. So we will have 4 panelists in our last session today that I will introduce each in due time. And one assigned discussant. It's Elisa Klüger. She's a researcher in Cebrap as well. And the rules of the game here is 15 minutes for a presentation. And Elisa will have up to 15 minutes to comment and make some, suggestions to the panelists. After that, I will open the discussion to the floor. So. Finally, I must apologize for not having Travis' presentation in our official handout, so sorry for that, Travis. And without further ado, I would like to open the presentations, and I'll invite the first panelist, Carolina Ramírez. She's a postdoctoral researcher in the interdisciplinary program in migration studies of the Universidad Alberto Hurtado in Chile. So, if you like, Carolina, I can show you some signs of the time, like halfway, okay, and then the zero.
Then, no, please no. All right. So thank you as well for staying, and to the organizers and who are hosting this event for the opportunity to present my work in progress. And this paper is framed in a larger research project which explored the relationship between community and space and increasingly diverse local spaces, urban local spaces. And this presentation in particular look at one of the neighborhood. It's better? Yeah. This presentation in particular look at one of the neighborhoods that this research involved. And it's based on ethnographic interviews, participant observation a little bit, and it looks at the long-standing migrants contested and interdependent appropriation of space in diverse commercial neighborhoods of Santiago, Chile, particularly from the point of view of interethnic relationships. So roughly a bit of context. In Chile, the migrant population is just reaching at 3%, still quite below the national average. Yes, even though it's quite low, Chile is the country of Latin America where migration is growing to a fastest rate. And also, migrant settlements in Chile are very centralized. Actually, 60% of migrants, if you actually listen to me, yeah, okay. 60% of migrants live in Santiago, 60%, and it is very concentrated in specific boroughs and neighborhoods. So from here, I want to claim that local places become crucial lens to explore the dynamics of living with diversity and the making of community, space, and ethnicity across time. So looking at discussing issues of material and symbolic process of making, inhabiting, and claiming space, I want to contribute to discussions on social productions and construction of space, ethnic social dynamics and increasingly diverse city places, and also ethnic migrants making of local spaces. So the empirical lenses I'm going to use are given by Barrio Patronato. Patronato is a neighborhood which is located in a wider area called La Chimba, which is named by Quechua indigenous group, which means to the other side, and signals, Francisca Marquez, an anthropologist, said what the Chilean colonial society wanted to deny and hide from view. Okay, so indigenous group, poor Spanish settlers, Peruvian artisans, and also places like cemeteries, food markets were located here. I think this context is interesting because it shows us that unlike European city places, local places that has been observed by European scholars in global cities, this is a place that, a neighborhood that, quite the contrary, from the very beginning has made place for otherness. I mean, otherness is part of its very foundations. So it's not one of these places that are kind of perceived by the local population like disrupted by migrants, right? So it's a kind of distinction that I think is interesting, like a Latin American place, and possibly there are many places Latin American like this, with a different sort of narrative of the construction of the space. So let me take you briefly to Patronato. and tell you a little bit of its reputation as the textile neighborhood of Chile. So there are two crucial moments, shifts in the political economy, which I have simplified for the purpose of this presentation, which set the social production of this space. Firstly, in the 30s, as we know, Latin America underwent important transformations. The fall in exportation, the decrease of supplies in the market, led to an inward development plan, starting a stage of import substitution, aiming to strengthen and build the local industry. Here, the state played a crucial role, facilitating credits, supporting investment projects, right, and things that we already, maybe some of you know. But what is interesting is that during this inward economic moment, the textile industry flourished in Patronato, okay? Overall, on the hand of Arab entrepreneurs. Then there is the second moment in which the local economy and a regional level as well started a new stage, diminishing the presence of the state, privatizing public companies, opening the path for importation, and pushing traders to compete in a global market. And we know that is part of a broader global picture, right? The opening lectures of this forum actually talk a little bit about those processes as well. So soon clothing shops in Patronato started to sell imported products from China and Korea. And actually, during this period, also Koreans settled in Patronato. I'm going fast because I prepared a 20 minutes presentation, but I have 15. The dominant narrative of Patronato, and I want you to keep this in mind, said that during this shift, many manufacturers could not keep competing, right? So they left the neighborhood, and holding credits and dramatically in debt, they broke and they left. Many of them, of course, Arabs. And so that's it. And then today, this narrative of marginality of La Chimba that I presented before has been today replaced by this sort of celebration of a multicultural commercial neighborhood. Today we can find here Chilean, Koreans, Chinese, Indians, Peruvians, Palestinians, Syrians, Haitians, Colombians, Venezuelans, among many others. So, but what is interesting, but maybe not that surprising, is that despite this growing diversity, the neighborhood is usually presented as a Palestinian Korean neighborhood. Okay, I think it's possibly related with this shift. So today, I'm going to focus mostly in Palestinians, Koreans, and their descendants. And I'm going to do that for diverse reasons. First, Palestinians and Koreans, as I said, have incorporated to the life of the neighborhood during these two crucial moments. This allows us, I think, to sort of analyze the context of their settlement in light of broader processes. Secondly, both Palestinians and Koreans are identified as the pioneers and founders of Patronato. During the last century, they have marked the identity of the place and also the uses of the space with their businesses, churches, clubs, and other places of encounter, which in a way have involved forms of spatial appropriation of a space beyond the purely economic. Thirdly, both Palestinians and Koreans have experienced process of social mobility and residential mobility, as well as social stigmas, which are quite similar. And I think this is interesting because it allows us to sort of decentralize distinctions conceived as natural among them, showing that part of their differences relate to their distinctive position in the receiving society rather than ethnocultural factors only. Finally, research on Arab and Asian entrepreneurs usually focus on those groups separately, and here I try to attend convergences, tensions, competencies, and interdependencies as well. Briefly, I will analyze as well the material and symbolic processes by looking at the entanglement of processes of production and construction of a space, and following CETA law, I understand construction of a space as factors, social, economic, ideological, and technological, that result or seek to result in the physical creation of the material setting. I will focus particularly in the political economic production of a space, which involves processes usually seen as triggered by neoliberal ideologies, such as decreasing control of public space, deindustrialization, and creation of commercial districts. Construction of a space, on the other hand, is reserved to the phenomenological and symbolic experience of a space as mediated by social processes such as exchange, conflict, and control. It involves memories, exchanges, images, and processes that should not be taken for granted, but be critically examined. I'm particularly interested in processes of ethnicization of a space in connection to memory making and place attachment. And understanding social space as the relationship between both allows us to understand intersubjective dynamics and large of broader processes. So, I don't think I can go speed up, and I think I'm halfway. So, a narrative of displacement and social replacement from one period to the other predominates in Patronato. And regardless the economic and social transformation I have just described, in this neighborhood, migrants tend to be seen as directly triggering his changes. And those changes are perceived as given by cultural differences. And I think that is kind of given by this chief, usually portrayed as a chief from La Turcoleta. I can explain why that name if you want later, and the Little Korea. So the Patronato made during this first period is usually nostalgically remembered as a village in the city based in familiarity and shared cultural norms, which were transported by Palestinian migrants and preserved by their descendants. For example, Claudia here, which is a descendant of Palestinians, recalled this idea of a neighborhood, and I'm not going to read it, but I'm going to just explain, the prominence of an homogeneous inhabitants and a sense of familiarity, which came up in many occasions of this era. What Claudia and many others recall are social cultural practices seen as traditional form of sociability deployed in the formal daily life of the neighborhood, part of a shared cultural repertoire somehow lost, if not in risk, in the neoliberal city. These symbolic meanings and cultural practices are connected to the material arrangement of the space of Patronato. At that time, many fabrics were based in the houses. So during this era, the polyfunctionality of a space preserved to some extent the residential and community-based character of the neighborhood, while we're also becoming Santiago little industrial textile hub. So then just to show you how the place has been constructed, then also in the second era, just to simplify it, I get a bit lost. On the other hand, then, Koreans are seen as marking a shift in the local economy, cultural life, and social landscape of Patronato, as well as taking the leadership of the space, which will remain until today. And this is a quote that sort of reflects that. So, but this is a narrative, just trying to unpack it, that merely recognizes that uses of a space are connected to broader processes in the economic transformation in the economic order, and it also admits that Palestinians had been leaving the neighborhood to live in middle and upper class areas, while we're diversifying the participation as well in the market. What emerged here is a narrative, a problematic narrative in a way, about the disruption of a previous idyllic way of living, a narrative that questions Korean legitimate appropriation of space. So narratives of Patronato are constructed on hand to processes of ethnicization of a space, which interweave the trajectories and representation of these different inhabitants with the political economic production of this space and its eras. Ambivalent and somehow dichotomic representations of Koreanness and Palestinianness include open versus closed, permanent versus transient, flexible versus inflexible, affective versus pragmatic relation to businesses. Here space becomes invested with meanings and ethnically encoded via social practices, which, however, are also economic and not necessarily ethnic. Moreover, many of the practices I cannot now mention too much, are actually shared by both Palestinians and Koreans, merchants, and their descendants. So first, what I want to propose is that experiences of economic change and uncertainty exacerbate the supposed ethnic differences, differences which are, however, are also connected to the economic use of space and systems of opportunities from one period to the next. Yet also narratives that highlight, I'm going to skip that, contestation over space, overlook new adjustment and interdependencies. Also, tales of social displacement can omit that forms of material attachment to a place can change. During fieldwork, real estate agents and representatives of the Chilean chambers of commerce of the neighborhood stated that property were mostly on hands of people with Palestinian background, with Koreans acting as their tenants. Alexis, a Korean shopkeeper, in a way, he emphasized that. And he said that, Palestinians are the real owner of the place. And he said something that's also interesting. He said that now the rent is too expensive for them. It's not a possibility to buy. And it's impossible to buy because it's too expensive. For them, it's a gem, a goose that gives them the golden eggs every day. So Alexis sees Palestinians as the real owner and pioneers of the area, with themselves, Korean, in a secondary position. The common sense idea, then, that Palestinians had sold the place and that, after facing bankrupt with the beginning of importation and had been displaced by Korean, is not that precise. Palestinian descents still keep material attachments there, not only properties, actually, but also churches, cafes, and clubs. I didn't show you the quotation. And then, so ownership and availability of properties have reconfigured the relationship among Palestinian and Koreans and their descendants, moving from competency in the textile industry to interdependency in the real estate market, the mercado inmobiliario. This ownership is actually expressed in the creation of the Korea Mall, whose images you can see there. This is an infrastructure that is owned by Palestinian investors and is managed by them. However, the 90% of properties is in the hands of Koreans, of shop tenancy. It's in the hands of Korean shopkeepers. So, well, this relationship, of course, is not exempt of problems, and increases in the tenancy are usually mentioned by Korean tenants. Here I just want to say, because there is a lot of, very common to hear that is abuse in the prices of tenancy, that it increase in dramatic ways. So what is interesting is how, responding to this problem, these tensions, Koreans and Palestinians and their descendants have organized themselves in their own chambers of commerce. There are Palestinian chambers of commerce and Korean chambers of commerce in a neighborhood, which is quite interesting as well. And one of their main roles is the mediation in tenancy. So now, if the increase in the tenancy cost is abusive or not, it's not an assumption that it's part of this presentation. But what I want to bring to the light is how an urban economic model that leaves space for economic speculation and deregulation and arbitrary changes like this can result in distances and new stigmas among groups that, to protect themselves, gather and reorganize their borders, a sort of economic organization across ethnic lines. So in a way, how you see, many relations here that are economic, but the way how they face it is by organizing their borders, which I think is an interesting process for the process of interethnic relationships. I guess possibly I'm out of time. Okay. Right. So I live here. And I just want to say that in a way this is an invitation for a long-term perspective to ethnic relationship in urban space, and also trying to go beyond ethnic difference, and to see how, in a way, important nowadays in a context which migrants are usually blamed by structural problems, how to see how the relationships are also affected by it. Something like that. It was a bit more longer, but we can talk later. Thank you.
put this to keep time, so thank you very much. Now we have Marina Chang, our second panelist. Marina Chang is a fellow researcher at the University of Conventry, United Kingdom. So,
thank you for organizing this school, SPASS. I want to start with a personal note. The notion of school is very important for everyone here, but in particular for me, for two reasons. The one reason is, unlike most of the speakers and participants here who have an association, studied, and researched in Latin America or in Brazil, myself haven't done any study in particular in Latin America and in Brazil. So this is a very new terrain for me. And second point, the notion of school is very important on a very more personal note. My father is 90 years old this year, and he is a professor, and he has been professor all his life, and he's still a professor teaching university, even he's 90. And there's a family motto, since I was a small girl. He said, we have to be student all our life, and we also have to be a learner all our life. And he's a model of his own values and principles, and we need to learn how to relearn, and we need to learn how to unlearn. And on this note, I would like to kind of share some of my modest collaboration with colleagues from different universities. And this is an interdisciplinary research, and it's experimental. I'm not economist, I'm not agriculturalist, I am not socialist, I'm not many things. But for sure, taking my father's motto, taking the spirit of learning on learning journey, I am a learner, I'm a student, and I think being a student is a privilege and is a luxury. So my slides.
Okay. And then go here. And just wait, it's gonna be okay.
So the topic is economic policy, alternative data, and global agriculture from transatlantic slave trade to agroecology. So, as I said, I am not economist or agriculturalist, so please be, and I'm quite ignorant about many things. However, let us to have a snapshot of all these 500 years of history. So back to the 2015, the Bank of England announced a new research agenda. Previously, a lot of data back to 1500 onwards to now. There's a lot of economic data is close to Bank of England, is not for public use. And however, in order to foster new collaboration between the public policy as well as the academic, Bank of England announced a new research agenda, one agenda research. And in that particular agenda, Bank of England is trying to say, respond to the fundamental technical or societal, ecological, in particular climate change. How the bank can be the very important driver to stabilize our financial and economic system in the changing world. So in particular under the risk of climate change. And in response to that, as I said, it's an experiment research agenda. We work with social scientists as myself, as well as the computer scientists. We try to use the data that is only released in 2015, 450 years of the data, microdata, to draw a big picture of how Bank of England playing a central role in the economics policy as well as agricultural policy from the 1950s onwards till now. And the idea we want to advocate is to see the, how this economic policy, agricultural policy is intertwined, and how the agroecology, the notion of agroecology, can play a very important role to respond to this new agenda and new demand for the global world, in particular in England. So these are the data, not only about the Bank of England data, 3 centuries of macroeconomic data, but we look at different other alternative data in order to kind of integrate, show a different narrative and different picture. So the 3 autonomous and interlinked themes from the 1916th, 17th century, the transatlantic slave trade and European empires, and how that intertwined with the current political and economic system through the 21st century large-scale land acquisition and their consequences, so-called land grabbing, and how the traditional farming system, including the small farm and family farm, as well as the small fishermen, can provide a coherent and shared vision to respond to climate change as well as the global stability for not only for the few, but for the mass. So one of the things I think is important, this graph, I'm not showing the, it's not. So these are the data we used to draw the picture. So there's 3, I said, the themes. One is the slave trade and the European empire, until now, the 21st century, the land grabbing, the large-scale land acquisition, and the current contemporary mode of colonization. And the third one is how agroecology can be a possible response to the older crisis we inherit now. And this is one of the graphs we used the microdata just for this with the slave trade. On the bottom is also the time the slave trade, the independence of all the colonies. So how the import and export in terms of different regions play a role in the physical policy and financial and politics. Just give you an example. In Bank of England in the 16th century, the director of Bank of England is also the director of Parliament, as the director of East Indian Company. So you can see, and the load of Bank of Lloyds. So you have banking, you have the Parliament, you have the slave trade ownership, the company to deal with the slave trade, and you also have the Bank of England. So the coherence and the consolidation of different aspects, plus going back to another important issue is the knowledge production. The Royal Society is also related to the Bank of England. So you have all different aspects in society to consolidate a new narrative and practice, as well as the implementation, in order to strengthen the foundation of the British Empire. And this is the maximization of different regions. You can see the pink is the British Empire. So previously we talked about the slave trade in Brazil, the abolition. So just to tell you 2 additional examples. When Britain finally to abolish the slave trade, and one of the things they said they abolish it, that is in the textbook, in the history textbook. However, they also pay all the slave owners 17 million pounds, equivalent about 20 billion pounds now, for the older slave traders' owner to compensate their loss. On the other hand, for example, David Cameron, the former Prime Minister in the UK, is the descendant of that historical heritage. And another case, so this is additional, Haiti, when Haiti is one of the first in Latin America who actually claim their own independence, and they try to emancipate themselves and agree to pay the former colonial French government 17 billion pounds, and the effect still continues now. So that is the global history of the slave trade and how that impact on the current economic and agricultural system. And this is all the places we said that now the colonization is not finished yet. And the land, you can see American and UK are the first and second largest land grabbers in the world. And these are the places that has been grabbed for various reasons. And we talked about the other, last week, the World Bank talked about the low interest rate. And the last 3 decades of low interest rate from the Bank of England as well as the Federal Reserve in the United States, the low interest rate actually facilitates a lot of land investment, because land is a very safe and attractive commodity that can become an investment target. And if you look at on the right-hand side, the peak of all these, the 28 countries whose land has been grabbed, the highest percentage are those countries whose lands are the most important for their livelihoods. So basically, we grab people's land. They are producing food for themselves. And these are the most threatened area in the world. However, the good news, even with all the colonization, all the problems with the land grabbing, we still have a lot of farms, and small farms in particular, around the world who produce food, who are able to feed themselves. Actually, it depends on the numbers. About 65% to 75% of the whole world foods are fed by small farms. And these are the areas, they have the small farm organization, La Via Campesina in Brazil is really stronghold and across the world. So not only the small farm and also fishermen, as well as the global important agricultural heritage. And these are the sites for us to understand how agroecology is one of the promising narrative. Not only narrative, it's also very important practice for us to reconsider how we relate to our food, fiber, and also the relation between humankind in society as well as nature. And the last, coming back to more to the home, when FAO actually last year, no, 3 years ago, 2015, they announced, they recognized agroecology is the underpinned by food sovereignty movement, is the very promising vision for new paradigm of the agricultural practice and agricultural development. However, if we talk about new paradigm, I need to emphasize what is the beginning of the crisis and how we refer to the origin of our history in humankind. And one of the things is to think that we talk about values and principles and practice. It is not only one value, it's not only one system. It's the system of a network of all different values and principles and practice. And I would like to end my small contribution by a plea, how we reflect our own existence and with our study. How you reconcile all the different conflicts and struggles and contradictions around us. And when we have the coffee break during the, just now, when you have a cup of coffee, think about where is the coffee from and the old history related within that cup of coffee. And when you drink it, think about our history and the whole history of humankind and the struggle within that. And this is a small invitation for us to think, in particular here in São Paulo, whose wealth and whose development is really related to the coffee plantation, and how we can be responsible and sensitive of the history and the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marina. Now, our next researcher is Pablo Martín Gómez. Pablo is an assistant researcher at the Consejo Nacional de Investigaciones Científicas y Técnicas in Argentina. So, please.
Okay, boa tarde todo mundo. Thank you very much to the organizer for accepting my proposal. I am very happy to be here with you to share my research. I was wondering which one is the best strategy to present my work, and because I have only 15 minutes, I decided to present my research projects and some preliminary result of my projects. Okay, this is a new research project, so I will appreciate a lot your comments. So I can change. Cool. Okay. So, okay, thank you. Okay, this is a new research project, so that I am starting this year. So I will appreciate a lot your comments about these new research projects. Okay. Let me read a little bit. The study of the second generation or children of migrants in receiving societies is an issue with a long tradition in the social science, public discourse and politics in different parts of the world. However, among the different analytical and methodological perspectives, there is not consensus about the direction, magnitude, and implication of these processes. The debate in the social science and the public discourse were about the concept and theories on integration, assimilation, incorporation, segmented assimilation, and so on, to explain these processes. In the specific context of the Argentinian debate, the debate were about the paradigms of the melting pot and the cultural pluralism. Okay, considering this debate, this research project, I aim to analyze the pattern of incorporation of the children of Peruvian migrants in the city of Córdoba with a fieldwork in the city of Córdoba. And in a specific way, we intend to study how the children of Peruvians incorporate themselves into Argentine society, if they have social mobility, the place they occupy in the social and spatial structure, and what type of identity processes they develop. Because the project has different objectives, I am going to focus in this presentation just in one and present the preliminary result of this objective. The first objective is to analyze the location of the Peruvian migrants and children of Peruvians within the class structure and identify the spatial pattern, that this is the part of the research that I am going to focus on. The second one is to analyze the social mobility of the children of Peruvians, and for this objective, I am going to conduct a fieldwork in the city of Córdoba. The second one is to compare the social mobility and trajectory of the children of Peruvian migrants with those of the native population from the same socioeconomic class. And finally, to analyze the identity process of the children of Peruvian migrants. Okay, this is the outline of the research project. For the presentation, I'm going to present, in summary, the theoretical approach that I'm going to follow, the data and methodology, and I'm going to present, as I said, some preliminary results. Okay, considering the theoretical approach, the discussion about the issue of the children of migrants in receiving societies was split into two great analytical frameworks, but this mainly in the case of the US, as you can see in the slide. The first one, the new theory of assimilation by Alba and Ni, the simulation model and its initial aspect was proposed by Robert Park, and there was an update at Albany in an effort to analyze the contemporary North American society in which they tried to describe the new migratory maps. The emphasis is placed on the analysis of the pattern of residential and marital segregation in terms of space and the composition of couples. Likewise, the occupational, educational, and income differential between migrant and the receiving societies tend to become more similar and as time passes. This is one of the main theoretical approach. The second one, a very important theory, is the segmented assimilation theory by Portes, mainly by Portes and Rumbot. This theory said that some migratory groups are integrated through the channel of upward social mobility in the mainstream of North American society, while others are integrated into lower socioeconomic segments. The central argument here is the following. Different migratory groups follow divergent occupational trajectories based on the origins of class, and explaining in part the fact that many children of migrants are in the highest or lowest socioeconomic segment of society. Between these two approaches, we can point out a third analytical model that keeps in mind the racialization processes present and the ethnic cleavage in a preferential way. For instance, the referential concepts of this perspective are those of racial formation, in the case of the US, or racialization of the structure of classes of the American society. Along these lines, two dimensions, and I want to emphasize the approach of the ethno-racial stratified incorporation, and that there is two main points here. The first one is the racialization of the structure of classes, meaning that the minority hold the lowest position in the structure of classes, and this pattern of racial and class stratification are stable. And the second one is that there is internal differentiation of classes in the different generations of migrants. Within the macro system of racial stratification of classes, there is also an internal stratification of classes within each ethno-racial group. Okay, this is the main theories about the issue of the incorporation of the second generation of migrants or children of migrants. I have a little. There is an issue because in Argentina we have to speak about the second generation, or we have to speak about the children of migrants. There is a theoretical problem here. So which one is the main hypothesis? Because of the fragmentary nature of the theoretical systematization on the topic studied in the context of South-South migration, we hypothesize the assimilation of the children of Peruvian migrants, meaning that the children of Peruvians have social mobility in comparison with their parents, and this is what we are going to verify. However, this claim is complete with a series of additional hypotheses. Factors like social class, racialization, and gender contribute to a formation of identity process as well as the process of incorporation to the class structure. Finally, a hypothesis to verify is whether or not there is a different mobility pattern for the children of Peruvian migrants in comparison to the native population. In empirical terms, we seek to analyze if it is possible to talk about second generation or not, of Peruvian, depending on whether or not there is a different pattern existing. To verify this hypothesis, we also analyze the pattern of intergenerational social mobility of the native population with the same social origins. Okay, because I have only 15 minutes, I am not going to present the result of the change in the native population of Argentina. So I'm going to present just the changing pattern of the occupation between the Peruvians, the family of Peruvian, and the children of Peruvian in 2 moments in time. I'm going to develop this idea here. There is there is a big problem in the case of the data that we are going to use to analyze this process, because as you know, in Argentina we don't have statistical, ethnical and racial statistics, and we don't have also a statistic about the second generation of migrants. We don't have a statistic about the children of migrants, and this is a very interesting problem in historical and social terms. So, because we don't have the statistic about the second generation, so therefore we cannot analyze the problem in longitudinal terms. In this context, our research intends to contribute to this discussion in a exploratory way, an analysis of the variation of the migrant Peruvian work specification over the time using census data from 2001 and 2010, comparing children and parents. Methodologically, to reconstruct a proxy of the children of Peruvian, we identify the labor specification at household level. And this was a very difficult task, because we had to track down the children of Peruvian in the case of Argentina. So, I am not going to go into detail because I don't have enough time, but we were testing a lot of multivariate methodology to try to localize the children of Peruvian and the Peruvian in the social structure of Argentina. So I'm going to present because the multiple correspondence analysis, trying to reconstruct the situation of the children of Peruvian in order to test in the hypothesis of a progressive grouping in some occupational structure, or on the other hand, a scattering of the same. And this is the analysis of the occupational structure allow us to analyze the interaction between the migratory process and the inequality process. Okay, this is, I don't know if you can see, this is the preliminary result from 2001, and I am going to present a little bit about the preliminary result about 2010. This is only the Peruvian population, because I don't have time. I'm not going to show you the same graph for the Argentinian population, but not to go into detail a lot, but there is a clear differentiation between the woman and man, because the women are mainly in the work as a domestic worker, and the man work mainly in the construction sector. So this is the situation for other members of the family and for the children, and it's a similar pattern in 2001. However, when we see the preliminary result of census data of 2010, we see the same pattern, but there is also a convergence in the case of the occupation of trade and commerce. But there is still the same pattern. The woman work mainly in the domestic sector, and the man work mainly in the as a worker in the construction sector. To go more into detail, here is the different tables about the situation of the family of the Peruvian house, of the family of the Peruvian household and the children, and we have here the situation for 2001 and the situation for 2010. Okay, I'm not going to go into detail because I don't have enough time, but I'm going to finally to say some finding. The first one, there is a gender difference in the mode of labor incorporation. Women mainly as a domestic worker and men in the construction and trade commerce sector. Consider the 2001 census data, the pattern is similar between parents and children. However, there is a decrease of the domestic worker sector and increase of the trade commerce sector in the case of women. The men increase the occupation in the trade commerce sector and decrease the occupation in the construction sector. In summary, there is a stable pattern between the two moments in time, between 2001 and 2010. However, there is a reduction in the proportion of women working as a domestic worker and men working as in the construction sector. The next step to analyze is how is the changing pattern of the native population, to analyze if there is some convergence between the native population and the Peruvian population. Well, I have, this is the, thank you very much. I really appreciate a lot your comments.
Thank you very much for the talk. We have Travis from Duke University. So please, Travis, we have 15 minutes. So.
There, in the talk, I understood everything, said black activist Joema Batista. It wasn't exactly in that moment when I became conscious of the racial question. And I get very mad. I was a pit bull militant because I was angry, because I was tricked. My entire life, I had swum into the Brazilian history that said there was no racism. Edna Roland from Maranhão describes a bus incident as the moment I became aware I am black. Flávio Jorge Rodrigues da Silva from São Paulo State recounts his grandmother's warnings at the beginning of his school life as the quote-unquote beginning of his racial struggle. Zélia Amador from the interior of Pará exclaimed that her exclusion from school activities caused her to see racism, quote-unquote, from then on out. Bonds of kinship and common struggle hold these diverse militants together and also have the imprimatur of one of the leading private research centers in Brazil, the Fundação Getúlio Vargas's Centro de Pesquisa e Documentação de História Contemporânea do Brasil, or CEPIDOC for short. Right? Through its oral history volume, Histórias do Movimento Negro no Brasil. The compilation is historic, but first I want to highlight some basic research questions. We're looking at an oral history compilation that cuts up interviews by theme. So you have full-length interviews, and they're cut up into sections, and that's how the chapters are formed. This book tries to answer, through its own method of oral history, what networks tie social movements together, what social challenges push them to act, what methods should scholars use to analyze social actors and movements, and how do coalitions and factions within black movements, in this case, affect political participation and change. Like I said, the compilation is historic because for the first time, a major research center dedicated to studying intellectual, political, economic, and military and cultural elites had turned its resources to documenting a historically ostracized group of militants who challenged the very heart of Brazil's old, maybe it's not so much anymore, but old national narrative. It is even more telling that one of the two researchers to first systematically collect these biographies as intellectual histories instead of just objects of studies, Verena Alberti, found herself recently fired in recent budget cutbacks. The CEPIDOC is a private organization which relies on a series of grants to maintain its oral history initiatives. This Black Movement Oral History Project received funds from both the South-South Exchange Program and the Program for Support and Excellence Research Group, PRONEX, of Brazilian's Ministry of Science and Technology. The organization's backing of this project makes clear that international development agencies and even technical branches of the Brazilian federal government began at the turn of the century to consider the study of black movements, not just the question of discrimination in Brazil, to be of serious scientific, national, and international concern. The interviewer's methods in this compilation, which goes to the second question of method, relies on testimonies of this small group of advocates, 38 to be precise, to, in a way, speak for Brazilian blackness. The authors readily admit that their methods connections to their use of oral history in a larger context. Writing in 2004, in the middle of collecting interviews, Alberti and Araujo Amilcar Pereira described oral histories as, quote-unquote, permitting the knowing of social realities through a narrative of history that crystallizes meaning about the past. The archive seeks to, quote-unquote, organize time to meld multiple, often contentious political and cultural observations and narratives into one cohesive identity, the Black movement. At the level of symbolism and historical preservation, these interviews are important in and of themselves. But how else might historians use this rich array of original sources and research? What might they tell us about the way social movements, with all of their alliances and factions, as I said before, affect political participation and change? If we are going to say that oral histories can serve as signifiers of larger trends, which these researchers affirm, we should make some attempt within collections we find to assemble data, as statistically as invalid as it might be, about the participants using basic demographic information provided in these assembled narratives. Such a method treats the network it observes as a quote-unquote collective biography of moments, trajectories, and involvements between Black movement actors, the state, and other, for example, religious civil society organizations. Such a method, while having fallen out of style during the North Atlantic's cultural turn, has served as the basis for several studies of Brazil's political class and workers' movements. So, two examples have to do with an elite political history finished in the mid-1980s, and a more recent one on the workers' movements, where they collect many biographies of militants, both important and rank and file, and they go connecting the dots, so to speak, to talk about the internal workings of a movement. Right. So ultimately, tying together these types of life experiences can help us know how a group, quote unquote, forms itself through the political process structured by existing objective conditions. That sounds familiar? It's a theory, it's the rational experience theory that we just heard about earlier today. Right? So, what data have I assembled here? I first started with geographical region. Right? So here's just the structure of the interviews. So as you can see, most plurality were born in the Northeast, quite a few in the Southeast, and less in the North and South. But notice on work and education, there's a notable shift, about 6% in the case, 6 and 5% respectively in work and education from the Northeast to the Southeast. Just of these 38 interviews, you can already see an internal intellectual migration, which makes sense because the Southeast has the main institutions of political power and knowledge production. So that's one interesting tidbit. All right. Education and work. You can see that there's an array of disciplines here. I won't name them because we can read them. But I will just note that there is a significant social exact sciences contingent here. But actually very few of these intellectuals that were able to enter careers in social science, or exact sciences, sorry. This could reflect the discrimination in the job market at the time. That wouldn't be surprising. There's still discrimination in terms of how many well-qualified Black students don't enter prestigious courses because of discrimination, and if they do, and they pass, often they don't transition into at least not into the industry of their degree because of persisting discrimination, which proposed affirmative action policies in the private sector are attempting to address. Right, but we do see a diversity of where they work in non-scientific, in non-hard sciences areas, like the government, international agencies, especially around the time that this was happening, because Brazil was just starting to make racial affirmative action a central part of its international policy. Some ran for offices, in this case, city councils, more or less. And one person made the transition from his law degree to law. Right? And others, such as Frei Davi Raimundo dos Santos, who leads Educafro, and continued in religious life while also founding his own organization to provide financial assistance in college preparation for socioeconomically and racially disadvantaged students. Right. Another interesting finding is experiences of the left. So you would expect, because the Communist Party of Brazil and the Catholic Church for a long time in the 1950s and 60s, when these activists are first coming of age politically, you would expect a lot of them to have participated in these organizations, even if they later rejected them. But that isn't the case, as you can see from the participation numbers here. Although there was slightly larger participation in New Left, exclusively New Left organizations, which meant student organizations, and also anti-dictatorial protest movements. But many first started in local commissions, in militancy for recognition of black culture as such. Right? Others looked to the party apparatus. Not as many in this volume, but some became part of the newly forming PT, and they decided that their militancy would take place within an existing structure, right? So 42% don't really have an opinion about the left, or at least they're ambivalent. About 26% of them make statements that are majority negative about their experience in the left. Many times this can mean, oh, the left only focuses on class. They focus on other partisan issues before issues of racial justice. And others tended to see more positive aspects. It trained me for my own political militancy when I decided to go my own direction. I still collaborate with my old militant organizations before, right? So, these are just a few findings that wouldn't be surprising, and you wouldn't need this oral history to show this, right? But it is a systematic collection of data, which is which is a very different approach than the in-depth biographical approach taken by many oral historians, right? So there are some limits, hence actually the importance of prosopography. If you take miniature biographies and you create detailed mapping of who knows who, then you can actually access other circles. This is a very specific circle of activists. That one of the researchers, his father, Amaury Pereira, is a very prominent black activist, and so he went snowball sampling his activists, which is fine. But it also means that to get a fuller picture of the black movements with plural, we need to look at other networks. For example, a obituary of Luisa Baijos was published in January of this year, listing 57 activists that she worked with. Only 17 are either mentioned or are participants in this oral history project for the CEPIDACI, right? So there's a whole nother network, and many of them include party activists, theater, militants, and such, that if we were just to rely on this oral history, which is a standard and reference for anyone in the field, we wouldn't get to know. So just what's the importance of the Black movement? And I'll end with this, a few of these statistics, right? With the help of the Black movement, political parties managed to put higher education at the top of the agenda. And the percentage of persons between 18 and 24 enrolled in universities, or who had already completed a degree, rose from 7.2% in 1997 to 18.1% in 2015. With an overall higher education enrollment soaring from 3 million in 2001 to 7.8 million students by 2016, right? With quotas in universities, 33% of universities had quotas in 2007, 129 by 2012. The net progress for African-descended populations in universities was striking. From 1997 to 2011, the participation rate rose from among 18 to 24-year-old Black and brown Brazilians fivefold, while the white demographic doubled. So clearly, there's more work to do, but this movement continues to be worthy of consideration, and it's a shame that Alberti was the one that went for budget cuts. It's really sad, but it's worth studying, and we should use all sorts of methods to do so. Thank you.
Hello. Oh, thank you very much, Travis. So we are really running out of time, so please, Elisa, if you could, I don't know, at least 10 minutes. I know that is unreasonable,
I'll try.
Then I can open to the floor.
Okay, so thank you all for your presentations. I will ask quick questions and request some clarification. Following the order of the presentations, I'll start with Carolina. First, why are the Arabs selling, the Palestinians selling / renting their properties for the Koreans? Do their social status has improved and they move to other / better neighborhoods? Where are they moving to? And since they left retail, what they are doing now? Second, it is really an invasion of Koreans. There is no kind of interactive coexistence in this case, no social creation resulting from this new arrangement. You talk about interdependency, but how it works exactly? Is it only economic, resulting from the renting of property, or there is more to it? Actually, most of my questions are inspired in the São Paulo case of Bom Retiro, which is our local version of Patronato. And if you have some time before leaving São Paulo, I think it's going to be interesting for you to visit because it has a very similar story. But at the same time, the layers of immigrant communities not only superimpose, but there is some conviviality and some interactions that are actually culturally creative. So I guess it could be an interesting contrast with your case. You mentioned that your project has two dimensions, the political economy and the racialization, ethnicization, memory, connection to place, attachment, etc. I would like to hear if you have two different methodological approaches to address each of these different questions. And I guess that's it for Carolina. Then Mariana, just a second. Mariana, all you are saying is quite new to me. I don't know if I can really add anything, but I feel like asking for further clarification on the topic. Could you, for instance, explain to me why agroecology is here presented as the solution for the environmental problem? Does the data that you collected indicate that, or it's a normative statement? Second, I read some parts of your paper, so I'm asking based both on the presentation and the paper. Why do you think that the Central Bank of England is engaging itself in stimulating the growth of this type of agriculture? I would really be interested in knowing how you expect central banks to interact with these movements, because I would guess that there are many ways of avoiding economic risk coming from environmental problems. And I would rather picture banks investing in modern technology, approving repressive measures against those damaging the environment, or measures offering incentives for social environmental behavior, responsible behavior. But I can't really envision connections between finance and social movements, because banks have deep relations and financial interests connected with people that can be accounted for the pollution itself. So I'm just curious. For Pablo, just a second, here. Pablo, in your case, I think most of my questions are methodological. So first, let me see if I understood the research design. There are several goals at the same time. First, you want to differentiate the Peruvians from the Argentinians. That would be like one layer. And see if their relative positions change over time at the same time. So are you going to insert both data on the two communities and from the whole survey? And are you going to reply this comparison a long time? And if you're going to do that, 10 years is a period large enough to get like this transformation. How many census do you have in this in this period? And second, if you are trying to compare as well the first and the second generation and verify if they had different chances of social insertion, how you're going to grab the internal differences? Are you going like to separate into different groups and see if they have different characteristics associated in like polarization in the multiple correspondence analysis frame? And how can you control for external factors like the crisis that reach Argentina like deeply in this period? So it's going to have any influence over the results that you capture. And finally, you told us that you wanted to analyze the identity process of the children of Peruvian migrants. Is it going to be a qualitative side of your research as well? And when you said at the conclusions that you have like some difference associated with gender, do you think that's a good idea to place the ellipse on the MCA so that you can see the dispersion of each of the characteristics and groups that you are trying to signal as like most important for understanding the difference between generations and groups? And finally, Travis, here. I want to know more on your research design as well. First, how have you selected the people that you were going to interview, how you define it, how large had to be the studied group, and which criteria you adopted, because it influenced decisively the kind of result you get in a prosopography. So I was wondering how it has been done.
I have to say right there, the premise of the question, I didn't collect these interviews. I'm reanalyzing a published set of sources.
Yeah,
from
but okay. So, but how you decided which published interviews were you working with? Like there is no more data than you could have collected, because you can do a prosopography including like large amount of generations or just this sector. So I'm curious on how have you decided that the 38 people that you decided to study were the ones that have to be included? Second, what is your posopography clarifying? Because beyond the cross tables, which kind of analysis are you going to perform with the collected data? Are you going to make MCAs, for instance, or look into internal partitions? Are you going to sketch the networks you're talking about, or look into for internal partitions, for instance? And since you are investigating the relations between activist and political change, are you going to map which resources, capitals are possessed by these actors and how they are mobilized in the political arenas? I guess that's all my questions. I try to be quick.
I have a suggestion. Can I open for questions, and then at least one round of questions, and then you answer, and then that's it, okay? So we have, I don't know, 10 minutes, give or take, so please be short with the questions. So who wants to comment or any questions? Edson? Anyone else?
So very briefly, my name is Edison, postdoc researcher at the University of São Paulo in Cebrap. I have a question for Carolina and one question for Marina. For Carolina, your presentation showed us how these flows of migrants change the contents of the space. But I would like to know if you're also reflecting on the meaning of the concept of borderline. Because you're using Lefebvre, and I would like to know if you are dealing with the concept of borderline too. And for Marina, in the 1990s, there was a great excitement about the concept of globalization, and people were arguing that globalization was bringing about a new rationale to the world. But your presentation showed that this is actually an illusion, because the world order is very much based on things like land grabbing, and we could think about modern slavery. So my question is, do you think that's possible to say that the world order is still very much based on the same pillars that existed at the times of colonization?
Anyone else? So over there.
My question is to Travis. I would like you to explain how you define racism in Brazil, because it's really different than racism in America, and it wasn't clear in your presentation how you define this in your research, and I think this is quite important for us to understand the way you see what is racism in Brazil.
Thank you. One last one. Oh. Yeah, okay. I have one for Pablo, because it's the only one. Nobody asked it. So it was more like a curiosity. I don't know if you have checked the intergenerational mobility in the original society. I mean, comparing societies and see if, I don't know, if paid the price to migrate, comparing the second generation, I don't know, something like this. So it's more like a curiosity. Thank you. So please, let's start with our original order. So.
Okay, I'm not going to respond on the question because of the time, but just some clarifications overall. I mean, just in case it was not sure, because it could be quite problematic if it wasn't clear. I'm not saying that Koreans are invading. I'm saying that it's a narrative that has been constructed. I was trying to unsettle that. So I think that's important to clarify, because actually that's pretty much what I'm trying to kind of critically unpack. So also Arabs, in the same way, there is a kind of predominant narrative that said that Arabs have sold their properties and they have left. And I think because many of them are second generation, in a way the data is very blurred, no? But what we can find is that actually they keep their properties in a great extent. Many of them, of course, are sold their properties, but they actually rented it. So it's kind of, I think that in a way that shows the symbolic value of belonging to this space with a long story, of settlement, migration of this group. And they have moved to live to other places. It used to be a place of Arab settlement. They don't have their houses there anymore, but they keep their businesses. And I think there is something interesting there. And also there is a similar pattern with Koreans. And yes, I focus in interdependency and the economic arena in a way quite pragmatically, because I thought it was interesting for what I was trying to show that even though this group was being kind of approached to the frame of ethnic differences, and that's being kind of in a way highlighted in the media and political discourses, it is important to show that many of these relations are not actually ethnic. So this is the reason why I kind of force this kind of more economic interdependency. Well, there is some conviviality, but maybe we can just want to give space to my colleagues as well.
Thank you for the question. I just briefly clarify the two questions Elisa was asked, the discussant was asking. I think agroecology, if we want to say, is a practice, is a science, and it's a movement. I think this is the combination of things. And if we want to say this is normative, yes, it is normative, because it's very different from the current dominant paradigm and dominant system for agricultural production. But in order to kind of complicate that, we also have to know agroecology also considers the social system and political system. So it's not only about technical, how you grow food, how you distribute food. It's also about how you relate to land, how you relate to social community system. So that is number one. And number two is how agroecology deal with land, how grow food using the most resourceable way to generate, keep the fertility, to keep the resilience, and how that, in particular in the climate change, we talk about the uncertainty. And because it has been practiced over the last 2-3 millennium, and that has been the heritage for us to learn. And going back to what I said in the beginning, we have to learn how to unlearn what we think that is the system, in order to relearn the new things. The new is actually in the past. I'm not romanticize the past. We also have to know a lot of struggles and a lot of the problems we have. But a lot of time we are forgetting history, and we're forgetting that is the treasure we all shared. And so going back to the second question, the Bank of England, of course, Bank of England is the dominant discourse and dominant practice. However, as an academic, we have the privilege and access to different kind of knowledge and how we can construct a new narrative and talking to the beast, talking to the people who are in power, and using the language they are constructing and try to deconstruct and provide. When we talk about criticizing what is wrong, we also want to provide solution that is useful and that is able to have the constructive dialogue. And going back to Edison's question about globalization, I think it's interesting that actually the room, we have so many people from different countries and different places. The globalization of knowledge is important. And globalization of knowledge about how we construct a different narrative. Going back to the Bank of England, the consolidation from finance, politics, intellectual knowledge, as well as economy, is tremendously important in order to have a counter-argument to the movement we want to build. We have to think about different collaboration or strategies or alliances. And of course, the globalization is built on a very particular kind of narrative. The neoliberal, based on the capitalist, and the capitalist by itself, by definition, is exploitation, imperialism, colonization. We are not saying that that is an elephant in the room. We need to tackle it. We need to face that thing. If we really want to talk about global system that is work for everyone, then we need to rethink, reflect those issues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. So again, I don't have enough time, so you raised a lot of questions. The first one, considering the data, I am going to, this data that I presented was about the 2001 and 2011 census data, but I am thinking to consider also the previous census from 1991. But I can go more deep in the past because I don't have the availability of data. I have just 3 census, and I get the microdata of this census, so I can run the multiple correspondent analysis. In relationship with the control for external crisis is a very good question. I think that one way to control for external crisis is to consider the changing pattern the changing pattern in the occupational structure of the native population. I mean, considering the changing pattern of the Peruvian population, but also considering the changing pattern of the Bolivian population, the Paraguayan population, and the native population. But I did that work, but I don't have enough time to present all the migratory groups. In relationship with the identity, this for me is a very good, interesting issue. We're going to conduct a survey, trying to. It's a mixed method. It's a survey, but it's with a part of qualitative research, trying to analyze the children because I don't know. This is a very important point. In Argentina, we don't have the population sample of the children of migrants. We have to reconstruct that population, and one task that is very hard is to find out that population because we don't have that population sample. So this is a survey, but also a qualitative moment. In relationship with the question about what happened in Peru with the pattern of social mobility, it's a good question, but I have a lot of questions, so maybe for the next part of the study is to go to Peru and to analyze what happened with the social mobility of the Peruvian migrant in relationship with the Peruvian society. I think that's all. Thank you very much again.
All right. Ironically, I'm going to answer the racism question first because it seems to be the shortest for me. I'm not coming up with one definition of racism or what I think racism is. I think there are multiple forms. There's day-to-day social interactions. There's structural and institutional racism. In Brazil and the United States, it manifests itself in somewhat different, but sometimes somewhat similar ways, right? You never had legal segregation here in Brazil, but you had a very strong economic and housing and social discrimination, much like we had in the north of the United States, where there was also no legal segregation per se, but zoning codes, the whole thing about a good appearance for work and everything, you could find parallels as well with us, right? So my goal with the project is to be as open to all of the various definitions that Black movement leaders give themselves, and then see how different lenses, different definitions of racism affect how one would analyze the sources. So I'm sorry if that's not clear, but I don't feel comfortable coming up with a theory of everything when it comes to racism. But I do I am aware of the different types of theory of race, and I will keep trying to keep myself informed and try to listen to the voices of the activists and their varying definitions of race. And for your question, it's a little hard to answer. It's sort of it was a book that was just oral history interviews split up into sections, and it had 38 activists. So the method, it was originated as a student paper, and so the idea was to take these 38 interviews, make an Excel spreadsheet, ask a few simple questions, some of them which were up there, and try our best to get them into some kind of quantitative format. Positive response 1, negative response to the left 2, right? Had participated in the Brazilian Communist Party 1, no 2, etc. So there are these. It was a sort of exercise, and my own dissertation project won't be a pure prosopography. It's going to be on the relationship between the Catholic Church and Black movements and the approval of university affirmative action in Rio de Janeiro, and then later at the national level, right? So more of a political social history. But I agreed when my advisor said maybe you should try a methodological presentation, because ultimately I will be conducting some prosopographies, but Pereira and Alberti actually have some good suggestions in a later 2009 essay. They say oral histories aren't exclusive. You can combine them with documents, you know, where are these people appearing in conferences, and are they still alive? If so, get their interview on how they remember the conferences, and try to go for the lesser known people as well. Right. So I spent a long time last year in the Baixada Fluminense talking to people who never left the Baixada, unlike Frei David, who has been interviewed because he's so prominent and so historic, right? Nationally, sort of the people that were with him when he was there that kept on working locally there, right? And so trying to get different ranges of people, and then who they talk to, and sort of also trying to sort of cast my net on the other side when it feels like I'm just going around in one particular network, and see if I can't open a few more doors with some interviews to other networks, right? It's not really defined because prosopography won't be the center of my dissertation, but I thought it was an interesting exercise to see what you could do quantitatively with a qualitative source.
Thank you, everyone, for the panelists especially. They were very interesting talks, and Elisa too for the comments, and for everyone for the presence and attention. So I invite everyone for tomorrow morning. We have the round table and the last one for this model 2 of the school. So see you tomorrow.